The entire palace froze when the alien queen's daughter ran and hugged me. The unexpected recognition Dr. had attended diplomatic functions on 6 different worlds during her career as a xenobiology researcher. But nothing had prepared her for the sheer magnificence of the Veltorian Imperial Palace. The structure seemed to defy physics itself, with crystalline towers that spiraled toward the violet sky and bridges of liquid light connecting platforms that floated without visible support. The main ceremonial hall where she now stood measured at least 300 meters across, its ceiling so high that small clouds actually formed near the apex, where warm air from thousands of gathered beings met the cooler, upper atmosphere. Sarah adjusted the collar of her formal diplomatic suit, feeling distinctly out of place among the assembled dignitaries. Representatives from 43 star systems filled the vast space, creating a spectacular display of biological diversity. To her left, a delegation from the Methane Collective hovered in their containment spheres, communicating through patterns of bioluminescent flashes. Behind her, the Krovan ambassador towered at nearly 3 meters tall, its crystalline skin refracting the ambient light into rainbow patterns. A group of the Cian diplomats debated amongst themselves in their characteristic 3-part harmony, their voices blending into something almost musical. Sarah represented Earth's Xenobiological Institute rather than any government, attending because her research on cross-species medical compatibility had become essential reading in diplomatic circles. She had positioned herself near one of the enormous windows overlooking the palace gardens, hoping to observe without being observed. To fulfill her obligations without drawing attention, the Valtorians themselves commanded immediate attention wherever they moved through the crowd. Humanoid in basic structure, they possessed an ethereal quality that made other species seem somehow unfinished. Their skin held an opalescent sheen that shifted through subtle colors based on emotional state, currently displaying the calm blues and greens of formal occasions. Most distinctive were their facial features, delicate and angular, with large eyes that held vertical pupils capable of seeing into the ultraviolet spectrum. Their movements carried an unconscious grace, the result of evolving on a world with slightly lower gravity than Earth. Empress Thala presided over the gathering from an elevated platform that seemed grown rather than built, its organic curves suggesting it had been shaped through biotechnology rather than traditional construction. The Empress wore formal robes that cascaded around her like liquid starlight. Her bearing spoke of someone who had commanded respect for so long that authority had become as natural as breathing. Her skin displayed the deep purple hues that Valtorian royalty cultivated through genetic selection, and her eyes held the wisdom of someone who had guided her people through 3 decades of unprecedented galactic integration. Beside the Empress stood Princess Lizara, and Sarah felt immediate sympathy for the child. The princess could not have been more than 8 years old by human development standards. Dressed in ceremonial attire that looked beautiful but profoundly uncomfortable, her small face held the patient resignation of a child who had learned that formal occasions required endurance rather than enjoyment. Unlike her mother's deep purple, Lizara's skin showed the lighter lavender of youth, with occasional flickers of frustrated orange appearing at her temples before being carefully suppressed. The ceremony proceeded with all the enthusiasm one might expect from mandatory diplomatic ritual. Ambassador Kelthix of the Centauri Coalition had been speaking for nearly 20 minutes about trade, route optimization protocols, his translated words carrying the sort of grave importance that made even Sarah's trained scientific mind begin to wander. She found herself studying the palace's environmental systems instead, noting the subtle air currents that maintained different atmospheric compositions for different species. The temperature gradients carefully managed to keep everyone comfortable. The acoustic engineering that allowed Kelthix's voice to reach every corner of the massive space without artificial amplification. She was mentally calculating the energy requirements for such sophisticated climate control when Princess Lizara's head snapped sideways with sudden, focused intensity. The movement was so sharp and precise that several nearby courtiers noticed and shifted nervously. The princess's large eyes locked onto something across the crowded hall with laser-like focus, her opalescent skin suddenly flickering through rapid color changes that suggested intense emotional processing. Then she moved, Not walked with royal dignity, not proceeded with appropriate decorum, but ran. Actually ran. Her ceremonial robes flowing behind her as she darted between startled dignitaries with single-minded determination. The effect on the assembled crowd was immediate and dramatic. Conversations died mid-sentence. Ambassador Kelthix's voice faltered and stopped. A Veshan diplomat actually broke harmony, creating a discordant note that hung awkwardly in the sudden silence. Palace guards moved with professional precision, tracking the princess's unexpected trajectory while simultaneously scanning for threats. Court officials exchanged horrified glances, clearly calculating the diplomatic implications of a royal child abandoning protocol during the most important ceremonial gathering of the year. The Empress rose from her seat with controlled grace, her skin flashing, warning red for just a fraction of a second. Before resuming diplomatic neutrality, Sarah had perhaps 3 seconds to register that the small figure was running directly toward her before Princess Lysara crashed into her with the full-body enthusiasm that only children possess. Small arms wrapped around Sarah's waist with surprising strength, and a voice muffled against her formal jacket exclaimed with pure, unfiltered joy that carried clearly through the silent hall. "You came back. You came back. I knew you would." The ceremonial hall descended into a silence so profound that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Every eye in the massive space focused on her with the combined weight of 43 civilizations' attention. She stood frozen, looking down at the small princess, attached to her like a lifeline, her mind racing through immediate implications and finding nothing useful. Slowly, carefully, Sarah's memory began assembling pieces of a puzzle she had not realized existed. 3 months ago, the orbital trade station at Kepler 44b, her layover between research assignments. She had been reviewing data in one of the station's public observation decks when she heard crying, soft but desperate, coming from behind a decorative plant installation. The child had been small and alone, her skin flickering through distressed colors that Sarah's xenobiology training recognized as Valtorian panic responses. She was clearly lost, overwhelmed by the station's crowds, too frightened to ask for help. Sarah had not thought twice. She had simply sat down nearby, close enough to offer presence without crowding, and asked gently if the girl wanted company while they waited for station security. When the child proved too scared to speak, Sarah had done what came naturally. She talked. Not about anything profound, just stories from her research. The time she had accidentally contaminated her own samples with coffee, ruining 3 months of work. The incident where she had mistaken a Krovan, diplomat's formal greeting gesture for a threat display, and nearly caused an interstellar incident. She kept talking until the child's skin stopped its panicked flickering, until she giggled, then laughed, until station security arrived with palace guards in tow 12 minutes later. Sarah had assumed the well-dressed child belonged to some minor noble or wealthy merchant. The guards had thanked her with rigid formality, confirmed the child was unharmed, and departed with professional efficiency that suggested this was routine. Sarah had caught her connecting shuttle and thought nothing more about it until this exact moment. The lost child had been Princess Lysara, the heir to the Valtorian throne. And apparently, she remembered Empress Thala, descended from her platform with movements that somehow conveyed both grace and barely contained intensity. Her skin had shifted 2 colors. Sarah's xenobiology training identified as complex emotional processing. Too many feelings occurring simultaneously to display clearly. Palace guards positioned themselves with subtle precision that suggested they were prepared for anything. From diplomatic incident to security breach, the Empress stopped precisely 3 paces away. Close enough for private conversation in the silent hall, far enough to maintain royal dignity. When she spoke, her voice carried crystalline clarity that reached every corner of the space, despite barely rising above conversational volume. Dr. Sarah Chen of Earth. Not a question. She knew Sarah's name, which meant someone had identified her very quickly. "You will accompany my daughter and me to a private audience." Immediately. The phrasing technically formed a request. The delivery made absolutely clear that empresses did not make requests that could be declined. Sarah attempted something between a bow and a nod, while a small princess remained firmly attached to her waist, achieved neither successfully, and managed to say, "Of course, Your Majesty." Lysara finally loosened her grip enough to look up at her mother, though she kept one small hand wrapped firmly in Sarah's jacket. "Mother, this is the kind doctor from the station. The one who told me about the coffee samples and made me laugh when I was scared." "Yes, darling." The Empress's voice softened fractionally when addressing her daughter, though her eyes never left Sarah's face. "We are going to discuss exactly that. You may come with us." The walk through palace corridors felt like a surreal dream where everything moved too slowly and too fast, simultaneously. Guards flanked them at precise intervals, their expressions suggesting they were mentally calculating response protocols for every possible scenario. Court officials who had been present in the ceremonial hall now scrambled to manage the diplomatic fallout of an interrupted ceremony, their stressed color patterns visible even through formal robes. Princess Lysara walked between Sarah and her mother, holding both their hands with evident satisfaction, occasionally looking up at Sarah with an expression of such pure happiness that it made Sarah's chest ache. The princess chattered about everything she had learned in the past 3 months. How she had told her tutors about the kind Earth doctor, how she had drawn pictures of their meeting, how she had hoped every day that Sarah might visit. They entered a private chamber that somehow felt more intimidating than the massive ceremonial hall, specifically because it contained fewer witnesses. Comfortable seating arranged around a low table that seemed to grow from the floor itself, walls that shifted through gentle colors in response to the room's occupants. The unmistakable sense that important decisions happened here, the kind that affected entire civilizations. Empress. Thala settled into a chair with fluid grace and gestured to a seat across from her. Before Sarah could sit, Lysara climbed directly into her lap with the casual assumption of welcome that only children possess, forcing Sarah to adjust awkwardly while trying to maintain some semblance of appropriate formality. The Empress watched this with an expression Sarah could not fully interpret, her skin cycling through subtle color shifts that might have meant anything from amusement to concern. "Explain," she said simply, her large eyes fixed on Sarah with uncomfortable intensity. "Exactly what happened at Kepler 44 to be stationed 3 months ago. Leave nothing out." Sarah swallowed, acutely aware that her mouth had gone dry and her palms were sweating despite the palace's perfect climate control. She looked down at Lysara, who had settled comfortably against her, and was watching her face with rapt attention. "I was between research assignments," Sarah began carefully, "waiting for my connecting shuttle in one of the public observation decks. I heard someone crying and found your daughter hiding behind the decorative plants." She looked lost and frightened. There were hundreds of people around, but everyone was too busy to notice. "I could not just walk past a scared child." "So you approached a distressed child you did not know," the Empress said, her voice carefully neutral. "In a public space, alone." "I stayed in full view of station security cameras the entire time," Sarah said quickly. "I never tried to move her anywhere private. I just sat nearby and asked if she wanted company while we waited for help to arrive. She was too upset to speak at first, so I talked. I told her stories about my research, about the mistakes I have made, anything to distract her from being scared." Lysara chose this moment to contribute enthusiastically, her skin brightening to happy yellows. "She told me about putting coffee in her science samples and ruining everything. And about the time she thought the big crystal person was trying to fight her, but he was really just saying hello. She did funny voices for everyone being angry at her." Sarah felt her face heat with embarrassment at hearing her professional disasters recounted to an Empress, but continued. "I stayed with her until station security arrived. Then your guards appeared, maybe 2 minutes later. They confirmed she was safe and escorted her home. The whole interaction lasted perhaps 15 minutes. I honestly did not realize who she was. I just saw a child who needed help." Something shifted in the Empress's expression, subtle but unmistakable. Her skin patterns changed to colors that Sarah's training identified as surprised. Consideration mixed with something that might have been approval. "Did not recognize her as Princess Lysara of Voltoria. Should I have?" Sarah asked. Then immediately wished she had phrased that differently as it might sound insulting. I had only arrived in this system 2 days before that. My work keeps me moving between research stations. One study, cross-species biology, not political structures. I do not generally assume lost children in public spaces are royalty. The Empress studied her for a long moment, her large eyes seeming to look through Sarah rather than at her. When she spoke, her voice carried layers of meaning Sarah was only beginning to understand. My daughter does not typically demonstrate such enthusiasm toward strangers. Dr. Chen, she has been taught appropriate caution from earliest childhood. She is reserved, even with family members, slow to trust. Her tutors consider it proper behavior for her position. The Empress's gaze dropped to Lasara, who had curled comfortably against Sarah, as though she had found her favorite place in the entire palace. She spoke of you every day for 3 months. She asked repeatedly when the kind Earth doctor might visit. She drew pictures for her art instructor depicting your stories, which confused him greatly without context. She announced to her education, counseled that she wanted to study xenobiology because her friend was a xenobiologist, and it seemed much more interesting than royal history. Almost smile faded from the Empress's face, replaced by intensity that made Sarah acutely aware she was being evaluated for something far more significant than a chance encounter. I need to understand, Dr. Chen, why my daughter trusts you enough to abandon all protocol, run through a formal diplomatic ceremony, and embrace you in front of representatives from 43 star systems. Sarah looked down at Lasara, who had begun to doze against her chest with the rapid transition to sleep that young beings across multiple species seemed to share. She thought about her answer carefully. Aware that her words carried weight, she still did not fully comprehend. Honestly, Your Majesty, I have no specific explanation beyond basic decency. She was frightened and alone. I wanted her to feel less scared. That seemed like the minimum requirement of being a decent person. Regardless of who she was, the silence stretched for several long moments, filled only with Lysera's soft breathing and the subtle ambient sounds of the palace's environmental systems. The Empress's skin cycled through colors Sarah could not fully interpret, complex emotional processing that went beyond her xenobiology training. Finally, Empress Thala spoke, her voice quiet but carrying absolute clarity. Most beings who encountered the lost princess of Altoria would have seen opportunity. Dr. Chen, political leverage, ransom potential, a chance to gain favor or extract promises. Her eyes fixed on Sarah with uncomfortable intensity. You saw a scared child and told her stories about coffee disasters until she laughed. The coffee incident really is universally funny, Sarah offered weakly. I am still not allowed unsupervised access to that laboratory. This time the Empress definitely smiled, brief but genuine, transforming her face from intimidating sovereign to something warmer and more human despite her alien features. You are either remarkably genuine or an exceptionally skilled manipulator, Dr. Chen. I am a terrible liar, Sarah assured her. My research supervisor can read my face within seconds. I have no ability to deceive anyone about anything. It has been a significant professional limitation during grant negotiations, that Empress Thala said softly. Her skin shifting to warm, approving colors is becoming apparent. A soft chime interrupted the moment. The palace's subtle way of indicating scheduled obligations. The Empress glanced toward the doorway where a court official waited with visible anxiety. Your Majesty, the diplomatic reception continues. The ambassadors are concerned about protocol. Inform the ambassadors that we will resume shortly, the Empress said, her voice carrying the absolute authority of someone whose words were not suggestions. She looked back at Sarah, and her expression shifted to something that seemed almost vulnerable beneath the royal bearing. Your research institute sent you here to present findings on cross-species medical compatibility. That presentation was scheduled for tomorrow's session? Yes. Your Majesty, I am altering that arrangement. The Empress stood with fluid grace, and Sarah carefully shifted Lasara in her arms, the princess murmuring, but not waking. Your presentation will proceed as planned, but afterward, I would like to discuss an extended position here at the palace. We have excellent research facilities that would benefit from your expertise. My daughter has clearly decided you are important to her, and I have learned that arguing with her when she is this certain about something, achieves nothing except mutual frustration. Sarah's mind tried to process several implications simultaneously and failed at most of them. You want me to stay here? In the palace? I want to determine if my daughter's instincts about you are correct, Empress Thala said carefully. That requires more than a 15-minute conversation. You would have access to our xenobiology research centers, collaboration with our finest scientists, and proximity to a young princess who would benefit from having someone in her life who treats her like a person rather than a political symbol. The Empress moved closer. Her skin displaying colors that Sarah's training suggested indicated sincerity mixed with hope. You are free to decline, of course. But I suspect refusing would disappoint Lysera considerably. And I find myself hoping you will not. Sarah looked down at the sleeping princess. Thought about her small apartment near the research station, orbiting Proxima Centauri, considered the professional opportunity being offered, and realized that she had already made her decision the moment a scared child had hugged her. 3 months ago on a space station, should contact my research institute about extending my assignment, she said quietly. The Empress's skin brightened to colors that Sarah recognized as joy carefully contained beneath royal composure. I will have that arranged. Welcome to Valtoria, Dr. Chen. I suspect your stay here will be more interesting than either of us currently anticipates. Building trust across worlds? Palace guest quarters assigned to Sarah contained more space than her previous 3 apartments combined, which made sense given that her prior accommodations had included a converted storage module on a mining station and a shared dormitory on a research vessel. Her new residence featured windows overlooking gardens that seemed to exist in permanent twilight, furniture that adjusted its configuration based on her preferred sitting positions, and a bathroom where the water responded to her presence with temperature and pressure settings that felt almost telepathic in their accuracy. She had been there for 3 weeks when Princess Lysara discovered that Sarah kept a regular working hours. Sarah was reviewing genetic sequencing data at 2 a.m, palace time, when she heard a soft knock on her door. Opening it revealed Lysara standing in sleeping clothes, her skin flickering through concerned colors, her large eyes bright with worry. Dr. Sarah, are you sick? My room monitor said you were still awake and moving around. Only sick people or people with problems stay awake when it is dark time. Sarah felt her heart constrict at the genuine concern in the child's voice. I am not sick, Lysara. I just do my best thinking late at night. On Earth, we call people like me night owls. Our brains work better when most others are sleeping. Lysara's skin shifted to curious greens. May I see what you are thinking about? Sarah glanced down the corridor, saw no guards in immediate view, and made a decision that was probably breaking multiple protocols. Come in. But if anyone asks, you are here because I am teaching you about circadian rhythm variations across species. The princess entered with the quiet excitement of a child allowed into an adult space, immediately gravitating toward the holographic displays showing Sarah's current project. Her eyes widened as she studied the rotating genetic models, her skin brightening with fascination. What are all the pretty spirals? These are DNA structures, Sarah explained, adjusting the display to make it more accessible. The instructions that tell bodies how to build themselves. I am studying how different species process medications differently based on their genetic structure. See this pattern here? She highlighted a specific sequence. This is why the standard pain medication humans use would actually make Valtorians very sick. Your bodies read these instructions differently than ours. Lysara studied the display with intensity that seemed remarkable for someone her age. So you are making sure doctors do not accidentally poison people when they are trying to help them? Exactly that, Sarah said, impressed by the simplification. I am creating a database so medical facilities across multiple worlds can treat everyone safely. That is much more important than the history lessons about ancient treaty negotiations, Lysara said with the blunt honesty of childhood. Tutor Marvin says I must memorize the dates of all 47 first contact protocols. But this seems like it actually matters. Sarah chose her next words carefully, aware she was discussing royal education with limited understanding of Valtorian customs. History matters too, because it helps us understand how we got here. But I think you are allowed to find some subjects more interesting than others. I found chemistry fascinating but could never stay awake during literature classes. Really? Lasara's skin brightened with relief. Mother says I must appreciate all knowledge equally because I will be empress someday and must understand everything. Your mother is wise, Sarah said diplomatically. But even empresses probably have favorite subjects. Maybe you could ask her sometime what she found most interesting when she was your age. They spent the next hour exploring genetic structures, with Lasara asking questions that ranged from insightful to charmingly absurd. By the time a palace attendant arrived looking worried, having apparently tracked the princess's location through whatever monitoring systems kept tabs on royal children, Lasara could explain in simple terms why cross-species medicine required individual genetic mapping. The attendant, whose skin displayed the stressed oranges of someone imagining professional consequences, began to apologize. Sarah interrupted gently. Princess Lasara was helping me with my research. She has excellent questions about genetic variation. I should have informed someone she was here. My apologies. The attendant looked between them with an expression suggesting she was rapidly recalculating the situation. Finally, she simply said, Her Majesty requests that educational sessions be scheduled through proper channels in the future. Dr. Chen. After Lasara left, chattering excitedly about DNA spirals, Sarah sat in her quarters realizing she had just established a pattern that would probably define her entire stay. The next morning, she received a formal message from Empress Thala, requesting a private audience. The Empress's personal study was less formal than the ceremonial spaces, filled with actual books, alongside holographic displays, comfortable seating that showed signs of regular use, and windows overlooking a section of garden that seemed designed for private contemplation. Thala was reviewing documents when Sarah entered, and she gestured to a chair without. The rigid formality of their first meeting, my daughter, informed me this morning that she now understands why humans and Valtorians cannot share medications because our genetic instructions translate differently, the Empress said without preamble. She explained this to her medical instructor, who was both impressed and concerned about how she acquired such knowledge. I apologize if I overstepped, Sarah began, but Thala raised a hand. Please, let me finish. The Empress's skin shifted to colors Sarah was learning to recognize as contemplative. Lysara's tutors have been attempting to teach her basic biology for 2 years. She has been politely resistant, completing assignments with minimal effort because she found the subject tedious. You explained genetic medicine to her at 2 a.m, and she absorbed it with enthusiasm. I have not seen her display toward educational material in months. Thala stood and moved to the window, her silhouette outlined against the garden light. My daughter has been lonely, Dr. Chen. Her father died when she was 4 years old. I am queen, which means I have perhaps 30 minutes per day to be simply a mother rather than a sovereign. The palace staff are loyal but formal. Her tutors are competent but treat her like delicate crystal that might shatter if handled incorrectly. The Empress turned back to face Sarah, and her expression held vulnerability that seemed at odds with royal bearing. Then you arrived and apparently decided to treat her like a normal child, who might enjoy learning about genetic structures at inappropriate hours. Do you understand why that matters? Sarah thought carefully about her response. Because she needs someone who sees her as Lasara first and Princess second. Precisely, Thala returned to her seat, and when she spoke again, her voice carried decision-making authority. I am offering you a formal position as Lasara's scientific mentor and cultural liaison. You would continue your research, but you would also spend time teaching my daughter, exposing her to perspectives beyond Valtorian tradition, helping her understand the diverse species she will someday lead in relations with. I am not a trained educator, Sarah cautioned. I am a researcher who apparently cannot resist explaining science to curious children. That is exactly what she needs, Thala said firmly. Someone who shares knowledge because they find it fascinating, not because curriculum requires it. Someone who treats her as an intelligent being capable of understanding complex concepts rather than a royal symbol to be protected from difficulty. The Empress paused, and perhaps someone who can remind me occasionally that my daughter needs her mother, not just her queen. Sarah looked at Empress Thala and saw beneath the royal bearing to the worried parent who wanted better for her child. I accept, though I should warn you that I have unconventional teaching methods and keep very strange hours. Lysara appears to thrive on both, Thala said, and her skin brightened to genuinely happy colors. We can formalize arrangements tomorrow. For now, tell me about your current research. I find myself curious about the genetic medicine database project, and my daughter will undoubtedly quiz me about it during dinner. Over the following weeks, Sarah fell into a rhythm that felt more natural than any schedule she had maintained before. Her mornings involved research in the palace's extensive xenobiology facilities, which contained equipment more advanced than anything she had previously accessed. Afternoons were spent with Lysara, exploring subjects that ranged from practical biology to human cultural practices. 2 creative storytelling sessions where they invented elaborate scenarios involving genetic mutations that granted improbable abilities. Lysara proved to be remarkably intelligent when presented with material that captured her interest. She absorbed information about evolutionary biology, asked penetrating questions about how different species might develop compatible technologies, and demonstrated an intuitive understanding of how cultural differences affected scientific interpretation. She also taught Sarah about Volturian customs with the patient enthusiasm of a child who finally had someone interested in her world. When our skin changes colors, it is not always about emotions, Lysara explained during one afternoon session in the gardens. Sometimes it is communication. See, her skin shifted through a deliberate pattern. This means I am listening carefully, but this pattern she shifted to a different configuration. Means I understand and agree. Humans miss all the things we say without words. That must make talking to humans somewhat frustrating, Sarah observed. Like we are only hearing half the conversation. Mother says it is like humans are colorblind in a world painted with meaning, Lysara said. But she also says humans compensate with very detailed verbal communication. You use so many words to say what we can show with skin patterns. These cultural exchange sessions worked both ways. Sarah taught Lysara about Earth's diverse biomes, about human art and music, about the messy, complicated history of humanity's journey to the stars. She shared stories from her childhood, about growing up on a space station where 3 different species, children played together. About learning early that communication meant effort and understanding meant patience. One afternoon, they were in the gardens examining a plant that grew in spiraling patterns when Lysara asked quietly, "Dr. Sarah, why did you really help me at the station? Most adults just walk past children they do not know." Sarah sat on the garden bench and thought about her answer carefully. "When I was 7 years old, I got separated from my parents at a research conference on Mars. I wandered around for almost an hour, too scared to ask for help, convinced I would never find them again. Then a Krovan scientist found me crying behind an equipment display. He sat with me, told me about his research on crystalline formation, and kept me company until security found my parents." She looked at Lysara directly. "He did not know me. He had no obligation to help. But he took the time to make sure a scared child felt less alone. When I saw you at that station, I remembered how much that had mattered to me. I could not walk past without offering the same kindness I had received." Lysara was quiet for a moment, her skin cycling through contemplative colors. "When my father died, everyone treated me differently. They were careful and sad around me. They spoke in quiet voices and told me everything would be fine. But no one just sat with me and acted normal. Until you. You told me funny stories about mistakes and disasters and made me laugh when I did not think I could." The child moved closer and leaned against Sarah's side. "I think that is why I ran to you in the throne room. Because you were the first person since father died who made me feel like just Lysara instead of poor. Princess Lysara, who lost her father." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion and wrapped an arm around the small shoulders. "You are allowed to be both, you know? Princess and person. Sad and happy, missing your father and still enjoying life. You contain multitudes, as a human poet once said. Multitudes, Lysara repeated, tasting the word. I like that. It means I can be many things at once. Exactly. I sat in comfortable silence, watching the spiral plant's petals slowly open toward the violet sky, each containing multitudes of thoughts and feelings that needed no words. The turning point came during the third month of Sarah's residence, when Lysara suffered a sudden allergic reaction during a state dinner. The royal physicians responded immediately with standard Valtorian treatment. But Sarah noticed that Lysara's symptoms matched a rare cross-sensitivity reaction she had documented in her research. She interrupted the physicians urgently, explaining that the standard treatment would exacerbate the reaction rather than resolve it. That they needed a completely different approach based on genetic markers she had identified in her compatibility database. The head physician, whose name was Telvern and whose skin displayed skeptical colors, began to argue. Empress Thala cut him off with royal authority that allowed no debate. Dr. Chen's research is the reason she is here. Implement her recommendations. Sarah guided the treatment personally, adjusting medication ratios based on genetic response markers, Mona, Lysara's vitals, with equipment modified specifically for cross-species compatibility analysis. The reaction stabilized within minutes, and Lysara's breathing eased as her body's chemistry returned to normal ranges. Afterward, in the private medical suite, where Lysara rested comfortably, Telvern approached Sarah with his skin displaying colors that she had learned meant respectful apology. I was wrong to doubt your expertise, Dr. Chen. My training did not cover the cross-sensitivity markers you identified. If we had proceeded with standard treatment, the princess's condition would have deteriorated significantly. Your training was excellent for treating Valtorians, Sarah said diplomatically. But medical practice needs to evolve as our civilizations integrate. No species knows everything. We all benefit from sharing knowledge. Empress Thala, who had remained throughout Lysara's treatment with the controlled terror of a parent watching her child in danger, approached Sarah after the physician left. I did my job, Sarah corrected gently. I studied cross-species reactions because situations exactly like this are becoming more common. Lysara was lucky that someone with relevant knowledge was present, but she should not need to be lucky. Medical facilities everywhere should have access to this information. Thala was quiet for a moment, watching Lysara sleep peacefully. When she spoke, her voice carried layers of meaning. When you helped her at the station, I thought perhaps my daughter had been charmed by simple kindness from a stranger. When you accepted my offer to stay, I wondered if you sought political advantage through proximity to royalty. When you began teaching her, I was grateful, but cautious. The Empress turned to face Sarah directly. Now I understand. You are not here for politics or prestige. You are here because you genuinely care about my daughter and because you believe knowledge should serve everyone, not just advance careers. That is remarkably rare, Dr. Chen, in any species. I just want Lysara to be safe and happy, Sarah said simply. The rest is just science. Just science, Thala repeated with a slight smile. Science that saved my daughter's life. Science that came from someone who took time to help a scared child because a Krovan researcher once helped her. These are the connections that matter, Sarah, not treaties or trade agreements, but genuine care that extends across species boundaries. The Empress used her given name for the first time, and Sarah understood it as both recognition and trust. May I ask you something personal, Your Majesty? After what you did tonight, you may ask me anything. What subject did you find most interesting when you were Lysara's age? Thala's skin brightened with surprised pleasure. Orbital mechanics. I found the mathematics of gravity and motion absolutely fascinating. My tutors despaired, because I wanted to calculate trajectories when I should have been studying diplomatic protocol. Why do you ask? Because Lysara mentioned you told her she must appreciate all knowledge equally, because she will be Empress someday. But I think perhaps she would benefit from knowing her mother once had favorite subjects too. That even empresses were once children who found some things more interesting than others. Thala was silent for several long moments, her skin cycling through colors Sarah could not fully interpret. Finally, she said quietly, I have been so focused on preparing her for the crown that I forgot to let her simply be a child with curiosities and preferences. You see things I miss, Sarah. Thank you for that reminder. Lysara is remarkable, Sarah said, looking at the sleeping princess. She is going to be an amazing leader someday. But she also needs to be allowed to be 8 years old and fascinated by DNA spirals and occasionally staying up too late, learning about things that interest her. 8 years old, Thala repeated softly. Yes. I sometimes forget she has time to be that first. She moved toward the door, then paused. Tomorrow, after she recovers, perhaps you both would join me for breakfast. Informal, in my private chambers. I find myself wanting to tell my daughter about orbital mechanics and why I once calculated the trajectory needed to launch stuffed toys into my tutor's face. Sarah felt herself grin. That sounds like an excellent educational opportunity. The next morning, over breakfast that felt more like family gathering than royal formality, Empress Thala told stories about her childhood that made Lysara laugh until tears ran down her face. She demonstrated the mathematics of projectile motion using fruit, calculated the angles she had used for optimal toy launching trajectories, and admitted that she had been a somewhat difficult student who questioned everything. Lysara's skin brightened to colors of pure joy. You threw things at your teachers. Only very occasionally, Thala said with dignity that was somewhat undermined by her amusement. And only when they insisted that mathematics had no practical applications. I proved them wrong through creative demonstration. Sarah watched mother and daughter together and felt something settle into place. This was what Lysara needed. Not just a mentor or teacher, but the space to see her mother as a complete person who had once been young and mischievous and curious. Someone who understood what it meant to be fascinated by specific knowledge rather than equally appreciative of. Everything as breakfast concluded, and Lysara reluctantly headed toward her scheduled lessons. Thala touched Sarah's arm gently. Thank you for everything. For saving her life, for teaching her, and for reminding me what matters. You have given me back something I did not realize I had lost. What is that? Sarah asked. The ability to simply be her mother, Thala said quietly. Without the crown getting in the way, Sarah squeezed the Empress's hand gently, feeling the warmth of her opalescent skin. Understanding that something significant had shifted between them. She is extraordinary, like her mother. You are both teaching me more than I could teach either of you, and we are fortunate to be learning from each other, Thala said. And her skin displayed colors that Sarah was learning to recognize as deep affection carefully expressed. When two worlds become one 6 months after Sarah had arrived at the palace, she woke to the sound of alarms she had never heard before. Not the gentle chimes that indicated schedule changes or the soft tones that announced meals. These were sharp, urgent, carrying the kind of authority that demanded immediate attention and suggested real danger. She was out of bed and reaching for her emergency communicator before full consciousness caught up with instinct. The device activated with her touch, and Lord Chancellor Mabrice's face appeared, his skin displaying the alarmed reds that meant genuine crisis. Dr. Chen, remain in your quarters. The palace is in lockdown. Security situation developing. Do not leave your rooms under any circumstances. What kind of security situation? Sarah demanded. Is Lysara safe? Mevris hesitated for just a fraction too long. Security teams are responding. Stay in your quarters. That is a direct order. The communication cut off before Sarah could ask more questions, leaving her alone with the shrieking alarms and the absolute certainty that something was very wrong. She moved to her windows overlooking the gardens and saw what confirmed her worst fears. Palace guards were moving with combat precision through the grounds, their weapons active and their formations, suggesting they were hunting for threats rather than maintaining normal security. Her door chimed urgently. She opened it to find not guards but Empress Thala, still in sleeping robes, a skin cycling through colors so rapidly they almost hurt to watch. Behind her stood 4 royal guards in full combat gear. Sarah? Thala's voice was controlled but tight. Lysara is missing. Extremists from the Valtorian Purity movement have breached the palace. They took her approximately 18 minutes ago. Security tracked them toward the eastern wing, but they seem to know our security protocols. They are evading our teams with precision that suggests inside information. Sarah felt ice water replace her blood. Purity movement. Those are the isolationists who oppose cross-species cooperation. Yes. Thiela's voice cracked slightly before she visibly controlled herself. They left a message. They took my daughter to prove that Valtoria's increasing integration with alien species has made us vulnerable. That relationships like yours with Lysara represent contamination of our culture. That they can strike at the heart of our government to demonstrate how weak we have become. Where are they taking her? Sarah asked, her mind already racing through possibilities. Through palace layouts she had memorized. During months of wandering between research facilities and Lysara's educational sessions, we believe they are heading toward the old diplomatic wing. It was decommissioned 3 years ago when we built the new facilities. The security coverage there is minimal because nothing important is housed there anymore. Thiela's skin flashed frustrated orange. My security advisors are assembling rapid response teams. But the hostiles have already threatened to harm Lysara if they detect armed forces approaching. Lysara made a decision that was probably reckless, but felt absolutely necessary. I want to go as negotiator. Every guard in the corridor stiffened. Thiela's skin flashed through colors that might have been anger or fear or both simultaneously. Absolutely not. You are a civilian scientist, not security personnel. I will not risk you. They took her because of me, Sarah said quietly. Because she has a relationship with a human. Because I represent what they hate about cultural integration. That makes me the logical person to negotiate. They expect armed response. They are prepared for violence. But if I approach alone, unarmed, willing to talk, it might give us an opening that military tactics cannot provide. It could kill you, Thiela said bluntly. These are extremists willing to kidnap a child. They will not hesitate to harm an alien they view as corruptive influence. Maybe Sarah agreed, but Lysara is terrified right now. She is with people who hate her for having an alien friend. She needs to know someone is coming for her. That she has not been abandoned because being herself made things complicated. She met Thiela's eyes directly. Seeing the Queen calculating terrible equations where every option carried devastating costs. I am not proposing heroics. I am suggesting dialogue. Let me talk to them. If I can establish communication, your security teams can use that as cover to position themselves. If they harm me, you lose nothing critical to Valtoria's future. But if I can reach Lysara, if I can keep her calm and keep them talking, maybe we prevent tragedy. The silence stretched for several long seconds. Finally, Thiela spoke to one of the guards. Get me direct communication with Security Command. Now. 10 minutes later, Sarah was walking through palace corridors toward the decommissioned diplomatic wing, wearing a communication device that would transmit everything she heard and said back to Security Command. Carrying no weapons, accompanied by nothing except her knowledge of genetics, her ability to talk about science until people either understood or gave up from exhaustion, and the absolute certainty that she would not abandon a scared 8-year-old who had become family. The eastern wing was eerily quiet after the chaos of the main palace. Corridors that had once hosted diplomatic functions now stood empty, their lighting dimmed to minimal maintenance levels. Sarah moved carefully, her footsteps echoing against walls that amplified sound in ways she remembered from previous visits when she had explored the palace's architectural acoustics with Lysara. She found them in what had been the main reception hall, a vast space with windows overlooking gardens now left wild. 5 Valtorians, their skin displaying the aggressive reds and oranges of determined hostility, stood around a small figure sitting on the floor against one wall. Lysara looked very small and very frightened, her skin pale and flickering through distressed colors that made Sarah's heart hurt. The child's eyes widened when she saw Sarah approach. Relief flooded her features, and she started to stand. One of the extremists grabbed her shoulder and pushed her back down with casual cruelty that made Sarah's hands clench into fists. She forced herself to relax. Stop there. Human, the leader said, his skin displaying colors Sarah's xenobiology training identified as contemptuous dominance. You have made a very stupid decision coming here. Probably, Sarah agreed calmly. I make a lot of stupid decisions. I once contaminated 3 months of research with coffee. I once mistook a diplomatic greeting for a threat and nearly caused an interstellar incident. Coming here unarmed to talk to people who hate everything I represent is probably similarly stupid. But here I am anyway. The leader's skin flickered with confused colors that suggested he had not expected casual acknowledgement of foolishness. You are Sarah Chen, the human researcher corrupting the princess with alien ideas, making her question Valtorian traditions, teaching her to value foreign concepts over her own heritage. I am Sarah Chen, she confirmed. I teach Lasara about genetics and cross-species biology and how different cultures see the world. I also tell her stories about how I accidentally destroyed expensive equipment and embarrassed myself in front of important people. Whether that counts as corruption probably depends on your perspective. Shh, you mock us, another extremist said angrily. I am not mocking anyone, Sarah said seriously. I am trying to understand what you hope to accomplish here. You took a frightened child to prove some point about cultural contamination. What exactly do you want? What outcome would make this worth traumatizing an 8-year-old? We want our world back, the leader said, his skin flashing passionate oranges. Before aliens came and told us our ways were insufficient. Before humans and Crovans and Deshans and dozens of other species decided Valtoria needed to change to accommodate them. Before our princess started learning alien languages and alien science, instead of focusing on Valtorian heritage. Sarah moved carefully closer, keeping her hands visible and her voice calm. Lasara learns Valtorian history and traditions. She studies her people's literature and customs. I know because she teaches me about them. She explained Valtorian color communication patterns to me. She told me about her father and how Valtorian families honor their dead. She taught me the traditional songs her grandmother sang to her mother. Learning about other cultures has not made her less Valtorian. It has given her more ways to understand what being Valtorian means. Lies one extremist spat. We have seen her. Playing alien games, speaking alien languages, drawing pictures of alien worlds instead of celebrating her own. She is 8 years old, Sarah said quietly. She plays with anyone who will play with her because she is lonely. She learns languages because communication fascinates her. She draws pictures of different worlds because her imagination is bigger than any single planet. None of that makes her less your princess. It makes her someone capable of leading a Valtoria that exists in a galaxy full of other species, whether you like that or not. She took another step closer, now near enough to see Lasara's face clearly. The child was watching her with desperate hope and complete trust that hurt to witness. Sarah spoke directly to the extremists, but she kept her eyes on Lysara. I am going to tell you a story. When I was 7 years old, I got lost at a research conference. I was terrified, convinced I would never see my parents again. A Crovan scientist found me crying. He did not have to help me. His species and mine had barely begun diplomatic relations. He had no obligation to care about a lost human child. But he sat with me and told me about his research until security found my parents. Sarah moved closer still, and none of the extremists stopped her. They were listening, their skin colors shifting away from aggressive reds toward more complex patterns. That Crovan scientist probably saved my life. Not dramatically, but meaningfully. Because he taught me that species differences matter less than basic kindness. That someone who looks nothing like you can still care about your fear and loneliness. That the galaxy is better when we take care of each other. She was close enough to Lysara now that she could have reached out and touched her, but she did not. Not yet. When I saw Lasara crying at that station, I remembered the Crovan scientist who helped me. I could not walk past without offering the same kindness. That is not corruption. That is connection. It is what makes civilizations stronger rather than weaker. Pretty words, the leader said, but his skin had shifted to uncertain yellows. You justify contamination with stories about personal feelings. We need Valtoria to remain Valtorian, pure, uncorrupted by alien influences that weaken our identity. Sarah finally looked directly at him. What made you Valtorian? The circumstances of your birth? The planet where you grew up? The traditions your parents taught you? All of those are real and important, but they do not disappear because you learn something new or meet someone different. My grandmother came from Earth. My parents grew up on Mars. I was born on a space station where 3 species lived together. I am still human. Learning about Voltorian culture does not make me less human. It makes me more complete. She knelt down beside Lysera, and no one stopped her. She took the child's small hand in hers and felt it grip with desperate strength. Lysera is Voltorian. She always will be. Learning about my species and others does not change that. It gives her tools to lead her people in a complicated galaxy. You say you want Valtoria back, but back to what? A time before you knew other species existed. That time is gone. Not because it was wrong, but because the universe is bigger than any of us realized. You can either help Valtoria navigate that reality with strength and wisdom, or you can traumatize a child and prove that isolation comes from fear rather than principle. The extremists were silent, their skin colors cycling through complex patterns that Sarah's training told her meant conflicting emotions. Deeply held beliefs encountering uncomfortable challenges. The leader's colors flickered between angry reds and confused greens so rapidly they almost blurred. "What do you propose?" he finally asked. "That we simply surrender? Accept contamination as inevitable?" "I propose you talk," Sarah said simply. "Not to me. To Valtorians who understand both tradition and change. To people who want your world to maintain its identity while engaging with galactic reality. To Empress Thala, who loves her daughter and her people and is trying to guide Valtoria through complicated times with wisdom rather than isolation." She stood slowly, still holding Lysara's hand, and pulled the child to her feet. "I propose you let Lysara go. She is frightened, and she needs her mother. Keeping her here does not prove your point. It just hurts a child who has already lost her father. If you want to demonstrate Voltorian strength, show compassion instead of cruelty. Prove that your culture values protecting children more than making political statements through trauma." Another long silence, broken by Lysara's quiet voice. "I am still Valtorian. Learning about other worlds does not make me less. Sarah taught me that I can be many things at once. Valtorian and curious. Princess and person. Missing my father and still happy sometimes." She called it containing multitudes. Child looked at the extremists with more courage than Sarah felt. "I love my world. I love our traditions and our stories and the way our skin tells what we feel. But I also love learning about other species and their different ways of seeing. Both things are true. I contain multitudes. So do you. Being Valtorian does not mean being only one thing forever." Sarah watched the extremist's skin color shift, watched the leader's face cycle through emotions that seemed to cause him physical pain. Certainty confronting doubt, conviction meeting the reality of a frightened child explaining herself with borrowed concepts that somehow sounded entirely Valtorian when she said them. "We did not want to hurt anyone?" one of the younger extremists said quietly, his skin showing shame colors. "We wanted to make people understand. To protect our culture." "I understand," Sarah said gently. "Change is terrifying. The galaxy suddenly being full of different species with different ideas feels overwhelming. But fear does not preserve cultures. Love does. Teaching your children why traditions matter while giving them tools to face new challenges. That is how cultures survive. Not through isolation, but through confident engagement with whatever comes." She looked at each extremist in turn. Palace security is surrounding this building. They are prepared to storm in here if necessary. People will likely be hurt if that happens. Or you can walk out with dignity, turn yourselves over to proper authorities, have your concerns heard through legitimate channels. Channels that do not involve traumatizing children. The leader was quiet for a very long time. Finally, his skin shifted to resigned blues. "We will surrender. But we want our positions heard. We want guaranteed that Valtorian culture will not be erased by increasing alien presence. I cannot make those guarantees," Sarah said honestly. "But I can promise that Empress Thala will listen. That legitimate concerns about cultural preservation deserves serious discussion. That trauma and terror are not required to have voices heard. She activated her communication device. Security Command, this is Dr. Chen. The hostiles are prepared to surrender peacefully. They want safe escort to proper authorities and guaranteed opportunity to express their concerns through appropriate channels. Can you confirm those terms? Lord Chancellor Mabrice's voice came through with barely controlled relief. Terms confirmed. Security teams will enter peacefully to escort all parties. Dr. Chen, are you and the princess unharmed? Sarah looked down at Lasara, who was holding her hand with both of the child's now, her skin showing exhausted but relieved colors. We are both fine. Coming out now, the aftermath involved extensive debriefing, where Sarah explained exactly what she had said and why. Medical evaluation for both her and Lysara, despite neither being physically harmed, and one very long, very tight embrace from Empress Thela, who shook slightly and said nothing for several minutes after seeing her daughter safe. Later, in the Empress's private chambers after, Lysara had been checked by physicians and put to bed with multiple attendants maintaining watch. Thela poured Sarah a drink that tasted like starlight mixed with honey and spoke quietly. You walked into a hostage situation, unarmed, alone, to negotiate with extremists who view you as a symbol of everything they hate. Yes, Sarah agreed. Because there was no point denying obvious facts. Asterisk comment for next part.